and today I'm joined by Thomas Wilson. Welcome to the show, Thomas.
Hello.
It's great to have you on. Could you tell people a little bit about yourself, please?
Absolutely. So I'm Thomas R. Wilson. I run R&H Creative Advocacy and Storytelling. We are a business that is dedicated to serving the neurodiverse, mental health, vision impaired, many other underserved communities. However, at the same time, my work is not exclusive to those communities. I'm a big believer in making sure that all people can have access to high quality events, services, information, no matter diagnosis. A big part of what I do is running sensory friendly events and care. I do things like Dungeons and Dragons, storytelling, active play, but I'm also a public speaker, writer, journalist, like I said, business owner, advocate. My work ranges from, like I said, those sensory friendly events to being a government level advocate for accessibility, not just for people, in the traditional sense of like wheelchairs and things. I'm a big advocate that accessibility goes far beyond that and has to honor all of who a person is. I'm also a family consultant. I do a really wide range of things. If I went over everything, it would probably take up the hour that we have. Um, but my big focus really is on those sensory friendly events, but also making sure that there is work, there is community and peer engagement out there that helps people, like I said, no matter diagnosis, better live their life, better access their community, and go through their days being heard, being valued, and feeling more empowered in their day to day life.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I say, interest, but there's a lot more awareness, I suppose, of could have people with neurodivergent issues and stuff like that. But we still haven't quite, from my experience anyway, still haven't quite um, got to the point where everybody kind of understands it and accommodates for it. So, what kind of drew you to kind of create an agency around that, really?
So I always say that it's based on my own life. So I grew up with my own mental health needs. Um, I was a young kiddo. I was, my teachers told me I was going to be a prodigy. Well, I was a prodigy when I was like first and second grade. I was definitely living with my own neurodiversity that we weren't really aware of. Um, but after a very significant loss in my life, my mental health aspect really flared up, and so, because of that, my school wasn't set up to support me. Many institutions weren't set up to support me. So, I went from that prodigy to the problem student, which was a term that was used for me a whole lot. And I'm going to work to make sure not to use certain language that will trigger the audience. And if problem student bothers you, I do apologize about that. But I spent a lot of my life dealing with institutions that were supposed to support me and school systems that were supposed to honor me and educate me, really demonizing me, telling me I was going to go to jail, lots of different experiences, my peers viewing me as someone both willing to bully and kind of a monster. And what I learned at a young age really was that there's a lot of flaws in a lot of organizations. Doesn't mean that they're not good organizations. It's just that there's a lot of mindsets, a lot of, in and of themselves, problems that need to be adjusted. And so as I got older, I learned that value in especially empathy. I started compiling what I wanted as a kid, what I wanted to feel, what I wanted in care. And always knew that I wanted to help people, that I wanted to do good work. Started my advocacy as a young age. For the last 10 years, well, 10, 11 years, I've been in healthcare, working as a mentor. But there was also another point in my life in 2021 where I was at a real low. As many of us with mental health needs know, there's never a point where you're entirely secure. Um, there can be one bad day, one horrible experience, and it can throw us off in a really bad way. And so I was at a low point and I decided, what can I do to kind of pull myself out of this? What can I do career wise? What can I do? And I decided I was going to be a storyteller. I was going to pursue that lifelong dream. I'd been a published author of many different things. And when I said that, I actually jumped out of the bed that I was laying in, depressed. I was like, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm still with my day job, still doing my work, but I opened my business, RNH Creative Advocacy. Um, and it started off with me being a moderator, helping people who were re entering into society figure out ways to get into the employment space and be entrepreneurs. Then it started with getting a job at an autism space called the Autism Community Store, which is a wonderful area, being a neurodiversity game master. And it's kind of snowballed since then. As I've talked to international businesses, I've worked as an advocate, it's constantly growing. And I really owe that to those negative experiences and learning that there's a lot of people who need strengths-based care, need an understanding, like need someone who has that understanding of what it's like. And since then, it's been growing rapidly. More and more people are inquiring, and it's this beautiful kind of transition from that kid who is struggling so hard to someone now who is actually, I also work as an educator who's helping people enjoy school, enjoy learning, enjoy storytelling, finding their creative passions.
Yeah, something quite interesting that actually I found when I was doing a little bit of research for this show. So there was a Harvard business study that found that 22% of adults with autism are in full time employment, which seemed wild to me, and I was quite surprised by that statistic. Is that something that you've seen from your own experience? Is that something that matches?
Yes. So I'm also part of the Employment First movement here in the United States. For those of you who don't know, the Employment First movement is dedicated to making sure that anyone, no matter their diagnosis, can have the work that they want. And part of that is setting up workplaces so that there's accommodations and program setups that people can actually do good jobs. And part of it is also making sure people actually get paid well versus getting paid less than what they deserve. And unfortunately, there is a staggeringly low number of people, not just with autism, it's people with physical diagnosis, mental health, all over the board. And unfortunately, part of that is because a lot of employers are either worried about hiring someone with a diagnosis or autism, or there's a lot of misinformation on how people work and how hard the communities I work for. I've actually seen a lot of people gain and garner jobs that they've had for over a decade, just because they're hard workers. They appreciate the work, they appreciate it, but there's so much misconception, especially here in the United States. There's a mindset that if someone's on SSDI, they don't want to work or they're lazy. Not everyone has it, but it's just not the truth. And unfortunately, in the United States, there's also just this really large gap between the amount of people who want to work, who can do the work, and those who just aren't willing to hire them.
Yeah. Do you think that it's because they don't understand, maybe that, like, the employers, they don't have a good understanding of how people with these kind of issues, if I can even call them issues, kind of how they operate, how they kind of blend into the workplace, and that not understanding it, sometimes it's easier not to employ them. And that's kind of the way that they think about it, maybe, and they go for a more neurotypical kind of person.
I think a lot of it is misconception. I don't think that people are automatically bad if they are worried about hiring someone. That's another kind of fallacy that goes around, I think, a lot, is if someone doesn't hire someone with autism, they're automatically bad. I think a lot of it is the point we are in as a society around the world. Like you had mentioned at one point that we are better than have been in a really long time when it comes to our understanding of neurodiversity, of mental health, of a lot of things, but we have a really long way to go. And a term I hear a lot is like we're in this golden age of mental health care. And I disagree. I think we're very much in the Stone Age. And part of that is because I think we're just learning how to utilize these tools effectively and with precision. But at the same time, there's so much misinformation. I have often said in podcast interviews, I get frustrated with the news because the news very often does not do a great job of honoring the community I work with. There's a lot of reasons. I'm not here to demonize the news. There are many great resources out there, but it's also TV shows and books and um, many other assets that kind of influence public perception. And unfortunately, representation right now for a lot of communities is still in a very rough place. Representation always starts in a really kind of ugly space. It takes a while to get out there, and unfortunately, we're just starting to move past that, like inching past that really ugly, like cultural representation mindset.
Yes. It's a difficult one to navigate, isn't it? At the start, I
Mhm.
suppose, and it's difficult because everybody's kind of finding their feet with it, and there's a lot of organizations, and I work in an organization that has quite a lot of neurodiverse people, and there's a lot of the more atypical people who really struggle to kind of connect with them and try to understand where they're coming from and what they're all about, essentially. Um, and there's not really a lot of work that goes around that, kind of educating and supporting other employees as well to kind of make them connections and understand. Like, that work doesn't go on from my experience.
I agree. I think part of it, honestly, just is again, I don't think people who don't understand are necessarily bad. I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but I think that kind of those like two mindsets can happen really quickly. Like people assume people just don't want to learn on one side, people get frustrated on the other. It's part of the reason why I'm such a big advocate for better quality education and better quality practice of empathy. I mean, I grew up in the early 90s, early 2000s, and I very much consider that like a dark point for people's perception of mental health. Um, I mean, there were so many crass, rude jokes about therapy, all these different things on the media, um, like TV shows in general. People's perception of empathy wasn't great, and I think part of it is unfortunately there's not a lot of access to high quality education around the idea of empathy. And people might kind of roll their eyes at that. But what I mean by that is so often like public education is somewhat lacking in the sense that it can fall into stereotypes and trying to scare people or judgmental aspects or even just a lack of accessibility based on cost. And I think a lot of things that go into people's public education are kind of generalizations. And unfortunately, generalizations are limited by nature. And I think if more people, I think also if more people were greeted with empathy around these topics, because there's a lot of hostility that can occur from even within my community trying to educate people about these topics. I think if we were a little bit more calm, a little bit more rational, and a lot more patient when having these conversations on both sides, there would be a lot better education going out there.
Okay, how do we kind of make that happen then? Do we use the storytelling? Is that part of what you do with your storytelling stuff?
That is part of it. And um, the first real quick answer I'm going to give is, I'm a big believer that every day we tell stories. We talk to friends and family about how our day's going. Technically, we're telling stories. TV shows, we're telling stories. Movies were telling stories, newspapers were telling stories. It's such an integral part of life. And I think the first step really is understanding that we're all learning. A big part of what I do when I tell my story, my own personal story, is stepping back and trying to understand that not everyone who's listening is going to have the experience, going to have the knowledge. And so I try to really hone down on things that a lot of us can appreciate and value, even if we're not, neurodiverse or not neurotypical. I think there are some really powerful unifying connectors, which is the human experience and the human struggle. And I think the other thing that is really helpful when I share my story is I try really hard not to judge people for not knowing. Um, my work is centered around, like I said, that empathy, that patience, that mindfulness, but it's also understanding that everybody's experience is different. So, whatever my service is, whatever the experience level, I work really hard to have those honest conversations, whether that's telling my story or working with someone through an active play event so that they can better understand what's going on in their own life, or if I am simply doing a lecture. I think that if we start to step back, remove ourselves a bit, remove our ego, remove our preconceptions, and honestly not just talk but listen, take in why people don't understand, and understand that ego is kind of the great undoer of good work. It's healthy to have a good ego, but if we start thinking we're better than people, start thinking we know better, or someone's going to automatically be wrong, we don't really give them a chance. We don't give them the opportunity to learn. And unfortunately, there's a lot of that going around.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think we need to know what the right questions are to ask as well, because we make assumptions, don't we, about what people understand and what they don't understand, and we don't really. I don't think we always ask the right questions.
Mhm. That's very true. Um, one of my great frustrations right now is it can be so hard to ask questions, especially when so many of us are punished for asking questions. Um, I mean, I grew up in a community that was told to be quiet a lot, told not to express ourselves, um, told that if we ask questions, we'll get in trouble, or told that we just shouldn't speak up. But I think something that is very true among even, neurotypical individuals is we're scared a lot of the time to ask questions. We don't want to come across as if we don't know things. We don't want to be judged. We don't want to be, hated on. And that makes it a lot harder to ask questions to begin with. And then a lot of us have experiences where, in general, just asking questions in one way or another has led to some very toxic interactions. And it's part of the reason I'm such a big advocate for empathy and asking questions is, and if you don't have a diagnosis, it's okay. It should be okay to ask questions, to garner education, because questions are a pathway to power. It's part of the reason why I always try to welcome them. Unfortunately, though, especially in today's day and age, I feel like there's social media, there's TV shows, there's a lot of hostility towards kind of the idea of ignorance. And I am not someone who's going to blame the internet for a problem. I'm a big believer in not blaming the tool, blaming the person, but at the same time, I can see like people worried about asking questions, and there can be trauma there. There can be a horrible reaction. And so I think one of the things that needs to happen in our society and many people may disagree, and that's okay, is a reintroduction, a refocus of like focusing back in on like that childlike mindset of asking questions, why it's important to ask questions, and a realm of patience around questions.
Yeah, sorry, my dogs are going wild in the background here, but so what could you do? I was talking to someone earlier actually about the whole social media thing, and I don't think that social media, itself is a bad thing. It's just a
Mhm.
tool, right? But it definitely amplifies and it can serve to polarize people as well because of the way the algorithms work, and they kind of create these echo chambers, and that kind of creates. Uh, it can create some really bad stuff.
Mhm. I thoroughly agree. My I think the scariest thing about social media is, other than the algorithms, because the algorithms can be really scary, is that anonymous, being anonymous online. We've learned as people that being anonymous can lead to some very scary actions. Um, but I also want to say, like, I think a lot of it also goes down to kind of, once again, education. I'm a big believer in getting rid of the customers always right mentality. I don't necessarily believe in disrespecting customers or things, but that kind of mentality of the customer can be right and is right no matter what, I think is a very dangerous thing. And I think that has actually tied in to social media a bit, in that whether or not we realize it, that like a lot of people, if they like content, they feel like it's owed, they feel like there's that merchant relationship. And I think that that can also lead into the kind of um parasocial relationships that also occur on social media, where, and I've been guilty of this as well, where I feel like I know someone or have a connection to someone because I've seen them online. um but in that, I think it's also, we we need to do better about educating, like at a younger age, the dangers of social media. And I think it's also just because it's so intoxicating, it's so much part of our life, but I think we need to work to kind of refocus how we should behave or how we can behave in a healthy way on social media, especially with like things like YouTube comment sections, or like comment sections in general being a great strain on a lot of creators' lives.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? It's a difficult one to get right because if you start censoring it, then where do you
Hmm.
stop? Who decides? And it becomes a whole big issue in itself, right?
Yeah, it's a really hard issue, and I think it's part of why I wish I am not personally in favor of some of the bills and things that have occurred around like marketing and aspects around like that impact creators. I really love the fact that there is things like YouTube where people can pursue their creative passions, their loves, their desire to create and chase success. I think it's fantastic. It's one of the things I love about being online, is seeing people and creating. At the same time, um, I think it's also really important to note, not every creator is out there for their audience best interest. And at the same time, not every fan is out there for their best interest of their creator. And I think it's just a really hard thing, and especially when we get into the realm of social of censoring and outright banning apps, it's always a little, feels a little icky to me, especially because so many of those people are not asking the creators themselves what should be done.
Yeah, like you say, it's a difficult issue. I don't know what the answer is, but there's a lot of really good stuff that comes from YouTube and the internet and these other platforms, and there's a lot of bad stuff, and I suppose that's much like life, right? But
Yeah.
it's trying to get that balance right and delivering it in a way that is actually net positive. Ultimately, we want it to be overall positive. There's always going to be some negative stuff. I don't think we'll ever escape that. That's just the way of life and human nature. There's always going to be a few bad apples, but it's about limiting them without limiting the positive side, right?
Well, and I mean, it's, a lot of what we're seeing with social media has happened with a lot of other things. I mean, I remember learning about people who got upset with the technology with the printing press and, the rampant abuse of books and things. And it's it's a funny thing with human nature. There's always going to be people who take advantage, especially people, who are already at risk of being in danger to begin with. I mean, I am not someone who is a big fan of credit cards. I've seen them hurt my community. I have seen them take great advantage. At that same time, I've also seen credit cards become vastly important to people's survival and like allowed them to pay hospital bills that they normally wouldn't rather pay. And, even like, it's this weird thing with human beings and technology. If there's people and there's ways that will take advantage of some form of technology, they will take form advantage of some form of technology. If there's people who are going to use the technology well and help humanity, there's always going to be people who help humanity and use it well. And I think the really scary thing is how that mindset can shift and alter in some really psychologically fascinating ways and some very jarring ways.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me how polarized everything's become now with social media, because it just seems to polarize people so much and push people into different categories, um, and that's quite. It's a little bit scary, to be fair, because I think it's pushing us apart rather than bringing us together, which is surely what the purpose of social media is.
I agree. I think it's I mean, it goes back to that mindset of the intent, and in and of itself, I think there's also I think it there's also like to a degree how we as human beings choose to ingest a lot of what we consume. I am someone, I don't drink, I don't, do a lot of imbibing of any kind. But we as human beings, we tend to like go to extremes with a lot of things. Especially someone with my own mental health needs, I work very hard not to use any substances. But it's fascinating how the human mind can go from 0 to 1,000 so quickly, with many different things. And you don't have to have neurodiversity or mental health needs to have that, but it really impacts a lot of communities. And I think it's fascinating how our concept of moderation can even change radically between, okay, let's watch one video and let's watch 100 within a week, or let's watch one TV show and oh my gosh, I finished off an entire season in 24 hours and I haven't slept at night. um it's part of the reason I love to learn about my field, because the human mind is this incredibly volatile, strange, joyous, wonderful, scary thing. And it's so fascinating to me how that works.
Yeah, and that's me, to be honest. That's how I would probably say I've got an addictive personality. If I start watching a series and I like it, I'll binge watch it, and I can't like stop. I need to watch and watch and watch until I finished it.
I I'm the same way. I will be honest, a lot of what I watch to have it on as background noise as I sit down and do work. At the same time, there's probably like 3 or 4 shows that have 11 seasons that I'm like in the eighth season of within a week, as I do my work. And um, I think that's one of the things I love about creativity in today's modern age is there's a lot to consume, there's a lot to explore, but we're in this really fascinating age in that there is so many options because creativity is being embraced, and I think the human brain loves that as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of choice out there and a lot of different ways you can go, and I think I think that's why we are so different now as well, because it's kind of 10, 20 years ago, before, well, probably more 20, 30 years ago now, before, kind of social media and technology and stuff, it was very kind of single track mind, wasn't it? It was, you had your community, you all grew up knowing the same people and stuff. But now it's kind of opened so many doors to us that it makes us think about different things in different ways, and really kind of makes us make new connections with our mind, really.
I completely agree, and I think the other, I mean, to speak, I think a truth of one of the great strengths of social media, um, is I know it's really easy to consume a lot of negative media, but I think if we step back from time to time and really look at like the technological advancements, all the ways that social media has actually helped humanity, I think it would be really surprising for a lot of people. Um, One of the reasons I say that is that like there's so many like therapists and creators who are giving free information to people who may not have accessed it. There's webinars, there's classes, there's information on healthcare lines. There's all this really fascinating information, and then there's also the way in which like there's been so many positive connections. I've actually met some of my closest friends on social media, people I wouldn't have known, and we started chatting over videos I used to make. And I mean, it's so easy to jump to the negative, but like you said, there's so many new opportunities for creativity and for our passions to be explored. And I mean, and speaking of the amount of content out there, I often find myself on YouTube watching gaming videos or like informational videos on different things just because like things like YouTube give people the opportunity to create something that I don't think would ever actually be on TV channels, which is really cool as well.
Yeah. Thomas, you're gonna have to excuse me a minute. I'm gonna have to go sort these dogs out because they are a nightmare right now. Give me 2 seconds.
No worries.
So sorry about that. They were going absolutely wild. Don't know why.
No worries. Do you mind if I ask what kind of dogs you have?
So I've got a basset hound and a miniature long-haired dachshund, and they're just very vocal.
I was gonna say basset hounds. That's quite a vocal breed of dog. So yeah.
Yeah, he does love to. Loves the sound of his own voice, I think. But what can he do? Hopefully, I put the TV on for them now, so hopefully they'll chill out a little bit. But yeah, sorry, you were talking about YouTube and stuff, and like you say, that that people do create things that
Mhm.
wouldn't be put on TV, and I suppose that this whole genres of stuff really that would never have been put on mainstream TV that have come from creators that people like to watch all sorts of stuff today, like vlogs, for instance, that would never be on TV. You got stuff people like unboxings and unwrapping new things and stuff like that, which stuff you'd never ever would have thought of, really.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I've even gone down like so. I will be honest. When I first started watching actual plays, I was watching with friends, and my mindset was like, "Oh, this isn't content. This is someone playing a video game." Because I had that I was new to it. I didn't have like I had that like cultural like how why watch someone play a video game instead of playing the video game yourself. And it's really funny that it's also to me like there's so many people who have found their footing on YouTube who are like charismatic, creative, talented, and it's kind of like how did they not end up doing this work? And I have occasionally said like I almost view YouTube as like the new Hollywood in that like it's almost also more accepting. It's hard, like it's incredibly hard to get set up on YouTube. I spent years doing it mostly because I just wanted to create, and it is kind of like working a unpaid internship for the longest time, competing against thousands, if not millions, of people for a slot for something. And I have so much respect for people who create on YouTube because they're putting in so much money, so much effort, and it could lead to something, it may not. And I think that's one of the great things about social media is the freedom to create something, the freedom to pursue what is inherent in so many of us, which is creativity. And I, as someone who works with a lot of youth, a lot of teens, a lot of adults, one of the things I found is what is so good for the human mind is creativity. And speaking of unboxing videos, I love unboxing videos. I've gone down rabbit holes of like hoof cleaning videos, which are weirdly therapeutic for me for some reason. Um, all kinds of really weird stuff. But I mean, anytime the human spirit gets to embrace creativity in some weird, wacky ways, it's very cool to me.
Yeah, there is a lot on there, and there's a lot for different people. There's a lot of stuff that I probably never watch or wouldn't be interested in, but there are a lot of people out there who are interested in it, and that's the beauty of it. It's that choice that you can go on there, you can kind of search for what you want to watch, and a lot of the time you end up going down a rabbit hole and end up watching something completely different anyway. But it's yeah, it's a great tool, and I think creativity is important for us for our mental health. To be honest, I think it always has been in its different kind of versions. There's different ways that we can be creative, be it traditionally writing, painting, all that kind of stuff, or it's all the new kind of video creation and editing and all that kind of thing as well that's come popular now. But I think it's something that's really kind of good for your soul, really.
I completely agree. I mean, when people question, whether creativity is good, I mean, I literally go back to the early days of humanity with cave paintings. Like, we as human beings obviously craved art enough to find a way to make drawings on a wall in a cave. And I think the other great thing about today's day and age is even if you're not the person on YouTube or in Hollywood or making movies or TV shows, there's so many alternatives out there to being creative in other facets. Like you mentioned, editing and like what I do with sensory friendly events. And I think it's important for us to know, like, we don't have to be the people on stage doing, playing the guitar, being the multi-million, viewer YouTube channel or subscriber. It's so important to find what's actually good for us and what is healthy for our spirit. I mean, I've seen editors who can do work that, like, I've never seen before, and they're not the face of the channel. I've seen writers who have gained garnered acclaim or garnered success, and there's so many behind the scenes roles that I think are amazing. And myself, I once chased YouTube success and social media success, and at the end of the day, it wasn't good for me. And now I've stumbled my way into being a storyteller, having some wild success and a lot of security. And I think when it comes down to it, part of the greatness of the creative journey is finding that creative pattern that can be good for us. And I mean, I'm a big advocate of having something special that's just for us, but creating is also, like you said, so good for the soul.
Yeah, I think it's innately human, right? So I think that's what sets us apart from all other species on the planet is our ability to create and innovate, and
Mhm.
that's how we've got to where we are now. And I think that's kind of deeply ingrained in us because everything that we've got now, from computers to everything else, has been kind of thought up and developed over time, and it takes creativity to do that. So that's part of who we are.
I completely agree. And I think part of it is also with everything we have created in this world, there are untold possibilities of what we can create going forward. And I think the other thing that's really helpful in that is the community's mindset of developing on ideas. I mean, outside of just creativity, it happens in science, it happens in business, it happens in like mathematics. People are constantly finding new ways to add on to our knowledge and explore and grow new possibilities. And I mean, even just within what I do, not many people are doing the work I do, but that doesn't mean that many people can take it and develop their own ideas. And I think, we've said so many times it's good for the human spirit to be creative, but I think it's also good for the human spirit to be ambitious and to pursue possibilities that we don't think we necessarily can, and to just in general think and ponder about possibilities in general. I've always had this philosophical side, and some of my favorite moments with people I know are simply sitting there just guesstimating or thinking about the future. And yes, it's not always positive, but at the end of the day, it's like it's flexing the muscle of the human mind.
Yeah, and like I say, that is an important part of it. We've got to kind of push ourselves. I say push ourselves. It's more natural. Just allow ourselves really to think and allow our minds to wander a little bit. And I think that is we and I've discussed this on so many shows before, but it's about, for some reason, society pushes us to fit inside a box in a bracket, doesn't it? You go through school, you have to fit in, you have to behave this specific way, and then the same when you get a job, you have to behave this way and you have to fit in. And it kind of really, I think that's what makes people miserable, is that kind of constant pressure to be something you're not, and not let your mind wander, let your soul kind of explore what it wants to be, and who you are.
And I completely agree. It's one of the reasons I encourage people so often to ask questions, especially when so often they're told not to. I find that so often when we're youth, we're born with a few key things One of them is an inquisitive nature, the other is creativity, and like there's so many others, but a couple others I want to mention are the desire to play and the desire to kind of pick things apart. Not everyone has them. Many of us have them in one way or another. There have been so many moments when I've been in an event watching someone who's at most 5 or 6 years old tell a story based on, a story like an idea they create. One of my favorites was I was at an event, a sensory friendly event, working with someone who's probably 5, and they decided to tell me the story of a storm that occurred right as we were doing the event. And this person was able to draw a tornado in a way I've never seen, which is like swirls. And they created various panels and they told me the story of the storm, and they told me how the storm was feeling and why it was feeling that way. And I thought for a moment, I just was like, I was amazed because this individual was able to practice introspective thinking, empathy, mindfulness, creativity, innovation, and all they really needed was someone to encourage that just gently in a genuine manner. And when I see that, and I've seen it in so many people, it baffles me that people want to put people in a box like that. And I know some of the reasons. Some of it is dark, some of it is to handle, like schools not having enough funding and things. But when I see people like that who are so young, who have the potential, to go and run a business or tell stories or become this massively successful individual, it's wild, and it's worrying sometimes that I know there's going to be people who are going to try to confine that creativity and that thinking.
Yeah. Again, I do understand why we kind of do that and why we built society that way, because it's easier, right, to a lot of degrees. So if you want to teach people, it's easier to have one way to do it and make everybody conform to that than it is to try and find lots of different ways to deliver it, I suppose. But it still doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the easiest thing to do, I suppose, to get more people through.
Yeah, and I mean, as an educator, as someone who teaches online, and especially as someone who hears from so many families, it's unfortunate that it happens. And I mean, we both know why. So much of it is just lack of support. Our educators around the world don't have enough support. Our youth providers don't have enough support, and it's unfortunate, and it makes me have so much hope for like the Gen Z generation and younger generations, especially with how like civically minded the younger generations are nowadays. Yeah, I don't think it's gonna stop any like global issues from arising, and they're gonna face a lot of hardships. But one of the things that I'm so excited for is these younger generations to get older, to have this passion for mental health and for social justice and things to occur, partly because I grew up in a generation, like I'm on the older end of like early millennials. It's wild to me how like someone born in 1990 can be so different from someone born just 7 years later in a lot of ways. But when I look at these younger generations, it's like I didn't hear a lot of the things they're fighting for occurring when I was growing up. And I knew so many people who are so scared, so alone because they had, like myself, mental health issues and didn't know how to process it. And just hearing these younger generations wanting to tackle these things, wanting to fight for them, gives me so much hope. And I really hope that we can support them, and when they enter into the education system, if they're teachers or into their workplace, they can get the support they need to do some real radical and good change.
Yeah, I think things have definitely got drastically better over the years, and I think this is the thing, we look at it, but there's always going to be work to be done in
Mhm.
some area. I mean, it's never going to be perfect, right? But as long as we keep the needle moving in the right direction, then that's what matters most.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even just compared to like 60 years ago or 70 years ago, the world has moved forward in some really beautiful ways. I know there are people who don't agree with me on that and they'd rather it be different in a different way. But I think like when we look at like, I keep saying like the 90s, early 2000 was a rough period. And like, no, we need to improve on our representation, but like the mindset towards, like you said earlier at the beginning of the conversation, understanding neurodiversity so much better, understanding mental health so much better, understanding, women's rights and all these things so much better. And I think it's a really beautiful thing, and it can be so easy to be angry and to be hostile because it's not moving necessarily in the capacity we want it to. But especially with things like social media and all this other stuff. But when we step back and really look and contemplate, and apologize, I just noticed there is a large degree of sunlight beaming right behind me. Um, when we look at these things and step back, I think if we look at them in a positive light and with some degree of optimism, we can start to notice the world is a lot better. We also have better access to medication, healthcare. It's just there's so much good going on in the world, and I think it's so important to know that.
Yeah, I think it comes from what some of the stuff that we were saying earlier as well about this kind of polarization and the way that people think they have to take a particular stance. So they think, oh, they have to say, oh no, everything's rubbish or everything's great, and they can't actually. I don't know why people can't have a bit of a more balanced approach and go, actually, we've come a real long way. Things are really, really good now compared to how they were, but that doesn't mean we don't still have a long way to go. You know, that there won't always be steps to take and places to improve on and things to improve on. I mean, we can accept both are true. So we have come a long way. Things are a million times better than they were 10, 20, 30 years ago. You know what I mean? Let alone if you look further and further back, it just gets better and better. So we are always improving. Is And we can accept that and still accept at the same time that there's a long way to go in certain areas, and new issues will arise and new things will develop, and then we'll have to work on those, and that's just the nature of being human in society, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's also really important to note to like, especially in polarizing aspects, there are people who want people to think things are bad. Like there are people. And I think there's also, speaking of generations, like there's a very different mindset between like myself as a millennial versus like how my grandfather and my grandmother thought about a lot of things. Um, but I think part of that is also a symptom of just time. As time moves on, things will move forward, things will move backwards. And I think as long as we as people don't stop fighting for the world we actually want and don't stop fighting for our communities and those in need and those who can have a better life, we can have that forward momentum. I mean, it's all things are always going to move back in some way or another. There's always going to be frustrations. We're never going to have a utopia as a society. I know that so much of the world wants it, but I think within the realm of humanity, it's we're not meant to be happy all the time. We're not meant to always be joyful. So much of the human experience is misery. So much of the human experience is sadness and worry and anxiety and fear, as much as it is glee and excitement and encouragement and empathy. It's just we have to learn how to, as human beings, utilize those emotions appropriately and not succumb to the bad ones. And I think there's a lot of people who want us to believe that being happy all the time is a possibility. It's not healthy to always be happy, but I think when we start to understand our emotions and understand the human experience on a better scale, we can move towards that balance in a better way.
Yeah, I think it's important that, you know, ultimately happiness, sadness, all that kind of stuff, they're emotions ultimately, and they that's something that kind of passes through us. It's not something that we choose whether or not we kind of hold on to it, and whether or not we decide that that's going to impact our day and have that impact on us. We need to learn to just kind of be, really, and just,
Mhm.
you know, understand that these things are going to come and go, we're going to experience them, but it doesn't necessarily change who we are. It just affects us in that moment. We just can sometimes you just got to sit there and feel it, and, you know, kind of accept that that's where you are in that moment, but it's not going to last forever.
I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it's difficult, and I understand it's difficult, and it's something. It's a skill to learn to be able to do that, and it take, you know, it's not something. I'm not saying it's easy. Just because I think that's how we should be doesn't mean I think it's easy to do that, and everybody should just do it now. But that's what we're gonna kind of practice and kind of try to improve on, is kind of not holding on to anything too tightly, and understanding that these feelings, these emotions, they come and they go, and we just gotta kind of enjoy the good ones while we've got them, and try and just survive through the bad ones, really.
and I think there's a lot of weight, and um, I think there's a lot of weight to learning how to embrace and to be. I mean, as someone who's faced a lot of hardship in his life, I've learned you don't have to like the bad things. You don't have to like truly love the horrible things in your life, but so much of moving towards a healthy, effective life is learning how to kind of manage and process and move on from those bad things. And depending on what you do in life, how to utilize them, not just to help yourself, but to help the community and to, make sure that we as human beings, same thing with sadness, we don't take it 0 to 1,000 so quickly. Same thing with joy, we don't take it to a point where we're being disruptive or hurtful or judging other people. And I mean, one of my all-time favorite movies is Inside Out, because it does such a beautiful job of discussing emotions and how there can be toxicity in everything, and how like the human experience is so much learning to manage those really horrible moments. And I think it can be a very different thing when we learn how to embrace those negative moments or those joyful moments and learn how to own them and value them and honor them for what they are and what their worth is.
Yeah, and like I say, it's a skill, right? It's something we need to learn, and it's not something. Again, it's not something that we get taught at school. So something we get taught at all, really. We kind of have to kind of figure it out for ourselves and find out how we can best do that.
I completely agree. And I do wish it's part of the reason I do my work. I wish we had more education on that as a younger age, especially, well, not just especially, but also how to communicate during each of those moments, the good, the bad, the middle, but also how to advocate for our needs and how to learn how to seek those out, not just as a individual but as a community, and how to support each other through all of that. And I think we're, like I said, we're moving forward, we're learning more and more about that as we go. And I have hope that in the future, no matter how much we move backwards, no matter how much we're separated, if we keep doing the work, keep focusing on that, we can move forward and we can build on these skills and build this education as we go.
Absolutely. What about yourself, Thomas? What are your kind of plans for the future? What's your future hold for you and your agency?
Right now, in all honesty, it's moving forward, seeking new opportunities, meeting new people, chasing new adventures. I have, a class coming up this February for Dungeons and Dragons to help work with youth. Got several new groups coming up, several new partnerships with organizations. Thanks to you, I now have a new website to check out to connect with new people, a new funny story to talk about a basset hound that just wanted to be on the interview. Um, but other than that, I mean, for me, it's learning. A big thing for me is learning how to balance what I have, how to step back and appreciate what I have while also growing my business. And even for myself, it's learning how to better communicate, better do what I do, better find and take in input as I create new programs, new goals, and as I go into 2025, hopefully get new gigs.
Nice. Do you have a website or anything like that, Thomas? Or where can people kind of connect with you if they want to get in touch with you?
Definitely. So I will make sure. So my website is RNH Creative Advocacy and Storytelling.net. My email, where you can email me, is ndttrpg@gmail.com. I also have a link tree, and you can find me on LinkedIn at Thomas R. Wilson. You'll see that I am with RNH Creative Advocacy and Storytelling. I will make sure that all my links are provided, as I will have several more I can give as well, um, in the chat for you here in a moment.
Brilliant. And what kind of advice would you give to people then who are maybe struggling a little bit and kind of don't really know what to do, not know how to get out of the rut?
The first thing I would say is be willing to stumble a little bit. There is so much power in learning how to move through life in these hard moments or these stagnant moments, and learning how to honor yourself. The next thing I would say is if you're really having a hard time, please reach out to those around you, ask for help, ask for those pathways forward. And the last thing I would say is, what I tell a lot of people, which is you may not see the light at the end of the tunnel, you may not see past your worries, but you got to keep moving forward, got to keep fighting, got to keep trying. Life is not easy a lot of the time, does not diminish what you're going through, but I promise you, if you keep moving forward, that is the best way to get to your next phase in life.
Absolutely. That's some great advice. And if you provide me with the links, I'll make sure I drop them in the show notes for people as well so they can connect with you and find you on there. Thomas, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show. Sorry about the interruption with the dogs, but what can you do?
No worries. Thank you very, very much.
It's my pleasure. Take care.